You hear stories on Reddit about petty revenge, but some are just on another level. This is one of them. It's about a scammer who set up an illegal parking trap in a quiet neighborhood, milking residents for thousands. He thought he was untouchable, but he never planned on the hero of our story, who hatched a brilliant plan to not only tear down his entire operation, but to hit him with a bill for a cool $10,000. The story begins in one of those neighborhoods you see in movies. Quiet, tree-lined streets where people actually know each other. It was peaceful, but that all changed when the
for sale.
This little lot was a long-time neighborhood eyesore, wedged between two old apartment buildings. Everyone was hoping someone would finally build a nice house there. That's not what happened. Instead, a man the original poster calls Gary. No speech provided. Then the signs appeared. Big, red, angry signs. Private property. Parking for authorized vehicles only. Unauthorized vehicles will be booted at owner's expense. $500 fine. $500. It was an absurd, predatory number. Street parking was tight, and for years people had occasionally used the edge of the lot without any issue. Now, this useless patch of gravel was a high-stakes parking trap. According to the Post, the first victim was an elderly woman, Mrs. Gable. She'd parked her car just barely touching the lot to run groceries to her daughter's apartment. She was gone for maybe 15 minutes. When she came out, her car was booted, and Gary was standing there with a portable credit card machine. He demanded $500. She was in tears, but Gary was unmoved. He just pointed at the sign and said, "Rules are rules." Her daughter ended up paying the outrageous fee. This became Gary's full-time job. He'd just sit in his car and wait. The second a tire crossed his property line, bam, a boot, a $500 fine. He preyed on delivery drivers, visiting friends, and contractors. Several neighbors called the police, but the response was always the same. Officers would show up, look at Gary's paperwork, and declare it a civil matter. Since it was private property, their hands were tied. Gary would stand there, smirking, knowing he had the upper hand. He was making a fortune off his own neighbors, and it seemed like no one could stop him. The anger in the neighborhood started to boil over. Every week, a new story. A single mom and nurse booted after a long shift. A young couple's U-Haul booted while they were moving in. The cost was always a crippling $500. Gary became the neighborhood villain, a role he seemed to enjoy. His arrogance grew right along with his bank account. The hero of our story, the original poster, or OP, decided to try reasoning with him. Maybe he didn't realize the harm he was causing. OP walked over one afternoon and calmly tried to explain.
"Look," OP said, "I get that this is your property, but $500 is a lot of money. These are your neighbors. Could you maybe consider giving warnings or just lowering the fine?"
Gary just laughed in his face. It was a nasty, dismissive laugh. "Listen, buddy," he sneered. "This is my business. The signs are clear. If people are too dumb to read, that's on them. It's called personal responsibility." He then turned his back and started polishing one of his signs. The message was obvious: get lost. The feeling of powerlessness was infuriating. This one guy was holding an entire community hostage, exploiting a parking shortage and a legal gray area. He wasn't just booting cars. He was sucking the life out of the neighborhood. And that's when the OP decided things needed to get interesting. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday. A young man was visiting his father, who had just been diagnosed with cancer. In the downpour, his front tire ended up about 6 inches onto Gary's lot. When he came out less than an hour later, his car was booted. OP watched from the window as the young man pleaded with Gary, explaining his family situation, that he was distraught and didn't have $500. Gary's response was ice cold. "Not my problem," he shouted. "Should have parked better." Seeing the look of defeat on that young man's face, something inside the OP snapped.
The anger turned into cold, calculated resolve. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to use Gary's own rules against him.
That night, OP declared war from their laptop. The first stop was the city's zoning department website. After some digging, they found the parcel map and clicked on Gary's lot. And there it was. The lot was zoned strictly for residential use. Any kind of commercial activity, like running a for-profit booting business, was completely illegal without a special permit.
Gary didn't have one. Next, a search of the state's online business registry for Gary's name and address came up empty. He was running a completely unlicensed operation.
But the real breakthrough, the cornerstone of the entire plan, came from a deep dive into the state vehicle code.
After hours of reading mind-numbing legalese, OP found it, a beautiful, glorious, little-known statute. It stated that if a driver returns to their car while the booting operator is still there and before the boot is fully secured, the operator can only charge a drop fee. They can't charge the full fine. And in that state, the drop fee was capped by law at a maximum of $50.
Not 500, 50. A beautiful piece of malicious compliance started to form. Gary's greed was his weakness. He had to be on site to boot the cars and collect his cash, and that was going to be his downfall.
OP stayed up until 3 a.m. typing up a one-page flyer. At the top, in big, bold letters, it read, "Know your rights." It detailed the zoning violation and, most importantly, quoted the state law about the $50 drop fee, complete with the statute number. The next morning, they printed 100 copies.
Phase 1 of the plan was simple: information warfare.
OP went door to door, handing out the flyer and explaining the plan. They showed their neighbors the law about the $50 drop fee. "He's counting on you not knowing the rules," OP told them. "From now on, we play by his rules." The mood in the neighborhood shifted from despair to pure excitement.
But the real revenge had to be bigger. It had to be a spectacle that hit Gary right in the wallet. That's where Phase 2 began. OP got a few of the angriest neighbors on board with an audacious plan. It was a little crazy, but everyone loved it. That Saturday, the plan went into motion.
A neighbor's brother managed a car rental agency and was happy to help the cause. 10 different neighbors drove to the agency, and each rented the cheapest compact car they had. A parade of rentals descended on the street.
The group chat lit up. The spotter gave the signal. Gary is in the nest. He was in his car, waiting for his next victim.
The first rental, driven by a neighbor named Sarah, pulled up and slowly, deliberately, parked with her back tire a foot onto the gravel. She got out and walked away. Like clockwork, Gary jumped out of his car, boot in hand, his eyes lit up with greed. As he knelt to attach it, Sarah turned around.
"Oh, excuse me," she called out. "Is there a problem?" Gary, annoyed, looked up. "Yeah, there's a problem. You're on private property. That's a $500 fine."
"Oh, my mistake," Sarah said, pulling the flyer from her pocket. "Actually, according to state law," and she read it word for word, "since I've returned to my vehicle while you're still here, you can only charge the $50 drop fee."
Gary's face went from smug to confused to furious. "What is this? That's not the law." "It is," she said, pointing to the statute number. "Feel free to look it up. Here's $50.
As they argued, the second rental car did the exact same thing, then the third and the fourth. Within 15 minutes, Gary was surrounded by illegally parked cars and neighbors holding out flyers and $50 bills. His head was whipping back and forth like a cornered animal. He started screaming that he was going to call the cops.
"Please do," Ope shouted from the sidewalk. "We'd love to discuss your commercial business operating in a residential zone."
This time, when the officers arrived, they were met by a dozen calm, organized residents holding a document citing state law. Ope, acting as spokesperson, calmly explained the situation, showed them video of the chaos, and pointed out the line of rental cars.
They explained the drop fee law.
and handed over a printout of the lot's residential zoning. The officer read the flyer. He read it again. You could see the light bulb go on. This wasn't a simple civil matter. This was an organized, legally backed complaint. After a tense chat with Gary, one of the officers came back over. "He will be accepting your $50 payments," the officer said, with the faintest hint of a smile. One by one, the neighbors paid their $50, got receipts, and drove off, only for the next rental car in the queue to take its place. They kept it up for 2 hours straight. The Saturday show was just the public humiliation. The financial knockout was still to come. On Monday morning, armed with a folder full of evidence, BOP went to City Hall. They had everything: video of Gary's meltdown, signed affidavits from scammed neighbors, copies of the outrageous receipts, and the certified zoning documents. They filed formal complaints with city planning for the illegal commercial use of the property, and with the city attorney for running an unlicensed predatory business. Because the evidence was so organized and undeniable, the city took it very seriously. According to the story, they launched a full investigation, subpoenaed his credit card records, and calculated his average daily income from the scam. About a month later, the hammer came down. Gary was found guilty of multiple violations. He was fined for operating a business without a license and for the zoning violation. But the biggest blow was the retroactive penalty. The city, based on their revenue calculations, fined him for every single day he had been illegally operating his scam. The grand total? Just over $10,000. His operation was shut down immediately. The private parking signs came down. The story goes that Gary, unable to pay the massive fine, was forced to sell the very lot he had used to terrorize them. In the end, his own greed cost him everything. That would have been a satisfying enough ending, but the real victory came next. After Gary sold the lot, it sat empty again, but this time the neighborhood was ready. The neighborhood association, energized by their collective win, applied for a city grant for community green space development. Between the grant and funds they pulled themselves, the association bought the lot. The day they closed the deal was a huge celebration. The first thing they did was tear down that ugly fence for good. Over the next few months, that symbol of predatory greed was transformed. They built raised garden beds and planted flowers, vegetables, and fruit trees. That ugly, gravel-covered lot is now a thriving community garden. It's a daily reminder of what can happen when a community decides they've had enough. The scammer tried to build a business on his frustration. Instead, they built a community on his failure. And that is the legendary story of how one neighborhood fought a scammer and won. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best way to fight a bully is to know the rules better than they do. Now, a word of warning. As amazing as this story is, it's not legal advice. Booting and towing laws are a tangled mess and vary wildly by state and even by city. The specific laws and zoning rules that made this revenge possible might not apply where you live, and trying this without knowing your local ordinances could get you into serious trouble. So your first step should always be to research your own local laws. What do you think? Was this a brilliant case of pro-revenge, or did the neighborhood take it too far? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and if you have your own story of malicious compliance, I'd love to read it. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and remember, don't get mad, get even. Just make sure you do it legally.